The morning mist hung low over the Scottish Highlands as Sergeant Major James Mitchell stepped out of the military transport vehicle. The crisp air bit at his weathered face, but he barely noticed. His mind was focused on the task ahead. Today wasn't just another training exercise. Today he would prove something that had been debated in military circles for months. Mitchell was no ordinary soldier. At 38 years old, he had spent nearly 2 decades in the Special Air Service, Britain's elite Special Forces unit. His reputation as a marksman was legendary. Fellow soldiers whispered stories about his impossible shots in Afghanistan and Iraq. But stories, as Mitchell knew, were often exaggerated. Today would be about facts, not folklore. The idea for this demonstration had come from an unlikely source. 3 weeks earlier, during a joint training exercise, some members of the Royal Guard had questioned the SAS's legendary shooting abilities. They weren't being disrespectful, just curious. After all, the Royal Guard were excellent soldiers themselves, trained to protect the monarchy with their lives. But they had heard so many tales about SAS snipers that seemed almost supernatural. Colonel Harrison, the Royal Guard's commanding officer, had mentioned this conversation to General Peters during a routine briefing. The lads are wondering if these SAS shooting stories are real or just military folklore, Harrison had said with a slight smile. They respect the SAS enormously, but some of these distances they claim to hit targets that seem impossible. General Peters, a man who had worked closely with the SAS for years, knew better than to dismiss their capabilities. He also knew that seeing was believing. That's when he came up with the idea for this demonstration. It would be educational, for the Royal Guard, and a chance for the SAS to showcase their skills in a controlled environment. Mitchell had volunteered immediately when asked, not out of ego, but because he understood the importance of inter-unit respect and cooperation. The military worked best when different branches trusted each other completely. If the Royal Guard had doubts about SAS capabilities, those doubts needed to be addressed directly. The location chosen was perfect for such a demonstration. The Highlands training ground stretched for miles across rolling hills and valleys. Visibility was excellent on clear days, and the terrain offered various elevations and angles. Most importantly, it was completely secure and isolated from civilian areas. As Mitchell unpacked his equipment, he could see the Royal Guard members arriving in their own vehicles. There were about 20 of them, hand-picked by Colonel Harrison to witness this demonstration. They climbed out of their transport, looking curious and slightly skeptical. Mitchell didn't blame them. What he was about to attempt would challenge everything most people believed about long-range shooting. The target had been set up the previous day by an advanced team. It wasn't just any target. At Mitchell's request, they had positioned a standard military silhouette target at a distance that would test every aspect of his skills. The rangefinder confirmed what Mitchell already knew from studying the maps. The target sat at exactly 2,950 meters away. To put this distance in perspective, most infantry soldiers trained to engage targets effectively at ranges of 300 to 500 meters. Even skilled marksmen rarely engaged targets beyond 800 meters in combat situations. What Mitchell was attempting was nearly 4 times that distance. At such range, the bullet would travel for several seconds before reaching its target. During that time, wind, temperature, humidity, and even the Earth's rotation would affect its path. Captain Davies, one of the younger Royal Guard officers, walked over to where Mitchell was setting up his rifle. "That's quite a distance, Sergeant." "Major," he said respectfully, "I've done some shooting myself, and I have to say it looks impossible from here." Mitchell looked up from his rifle scope adjustments. "That's the point, Captain. Impossible is just another word for something nobody's figured out how to do yet." He gestured toward the distant target, barely visible even with binoculars. "See, most people think long-range shooting is about having a powerful rifle and good eyes. But it's really about understanding everything that happens between you and that target. The Royal Guard members gathered around as Mitchell began his explanation. He wanted them to understand that this wasn't about showing off. This was about the science and skill that went into extreme long-range shooting. When you fire a bullet over this distance, he began, you're not just aiming at where the target is. You're aiming at where the target will be when the bullet arrives, accounting for every force that will act on that bullet during its flight. Colonel Harrison approached the group, having observed the setup from a distance. "Gentlemen," he announced to his men, "today you're going to witness something special. Sergeant Major Mitchell has agreed to demonstrate the capabilities that have made SAS snipers legendary. I want you to pay close attention, not just to the shot itself, but to the preparation and calculation that goes into it." Mitchell appreciated the colonel's introduction. Too many people focused only on the moment of firing, missing the hours or even days of preparation that made such shots possible. "The rifle I'm using today," Mitchell explained, holding up his weapon, "is a specialized long-range system, but it's the same type available to many military units. What makes the difference is understanding how to use it properly. The weather conditions were being monitored constantly. Wind speed and direction at various altitudes, temperature gradients, humidity levels, and barometric pressure all needed to be factored into the calculations. Mitchell had instruments to measure these conditions, but experience had taught him to feel them as well. The slight breeze on his face, the way the grass moved at different distances, even the behavior of birds in the area gave him information about air currents. As the morning progressed, more observers arrived. Word had somehow spread through the base that something special was happening. Senior officers, training instructors, and even some visiting foreign military attachés came to witness the demonstration. The pressure was mounting, but Mitchell felt calm. Pressure was something he had learned to use rather than fight against. The Royal Guard members watched with growing fascination as Mitchell methodically worked through his preparations. This wasn't the quick, dramatic shooting they had seen in movies. This was careful, scientific, almost meditative in its precision. Every movement had purpose, every calculation was double-checked, every environmental factor was considered and recorded. Mitchell opened his field notebook, its pages weathered from years of use in various climates and conditions. Each page contained data from previous shots, wind patterns, and environmental observations that had been collected over his career. This wasn't just a book of numbers. It was a collection of hard-earned knowledge that could mean the difference between mission success and failure. "The first thing people don't understand about extreme long-range shooting," Mitchell explained, to the gathered Royal Guard members, "is that you're essentially predicting the future. When I fire this bullet, it will take approximately 4 seconds to reach that target. In 4 seconds, wind conditions can change, the target might move, and dozens of other variables can shift." Captain Davies leaned forward, genuinely interested. "How do you account for all those variables, Sergeant Major?" Mitchell smiled. "Years of practice and a lot of mathematics. But let me show you the basics." He pulled out a handheld weather station, a device about the size of a smartphone, but packed with sensors. "This gives me current wind speed and direction, temperature, humidity, and barometric pressure. But these are just starting points." The device showed wind moving at 8 kilometers per hour from the southwest, but Mitchell knew that wind conditions changed with altitude and distance. He pulled out a pair of high-powered binoculars and began studying the terrain between his position and the target. "See how the grass is moving differently at various points along the range? That tells me where the wind is stronger or weaker, where it might be shifting direction." Lieutenant Parker, another Royal Guard officer, pointed toward some trees about halfway to the target. "Those trees seem to be swaying more than the grass near us. Does that affect your calculations?" "Exactly," Mitchell said with approval. "Those trees tell me the wind is stronger at their location and slightly more from the west than it is here. My bullet will pass through that wind zone about 2 seconds into its flight. I need to account for how that will push it off course." Mitchell began making notes in his book, translating his observations into numbers. Wind drift at various distances. elevation adjustments for the uphill angle to the target, and corrections for the density of the air at their current altitude. The Highland location was several hundred meters above sea level, which meant the air was thinner than at ground level, affecting how the bullet would fly. The rifle itself, Mitchell continued, patting the stock of his weapon, is just a tool, a very precise tool, but still just a tool. What makes the difference is understanding ballistics. He showed them a small computer device attached to his equipment. This calculates the trajectory of my specific ammunition under current conditions. But it only works if I feed it accurate information. The computer required data about the exact ammunition being used, the rifle's characteristics, and all the environmental factors Mitchell had been measuring. He entered the information methodically, double-checking each number. A single mistake in any calculation could result in a miss by several meters at this extreme range. Colonel Harrison watched the process with growing appreciation. He had always respected SAS capabilities, but seeing the scientific approach behind their legendary marksmanship was impressive. "How long does this preparation normally take in a combat situation?" he asked. "Depends on the circumstances," Mitchell replied without looking up from his calculations. "In an emergency, I can make these calculations and take a shot in under 2 minutes. But for maximum accuracy, especially at extreme ranges like this, I prefer to take my time. In combat, we often have the luxury of setting up in advance when a long-range shot is planned." The Royal Guard members were beginning to understand that this wasn't about quick reflexes or natural talent alone. This was about applying scientific principles under pressure, making complex calculations while remaining calm and focused. It was a skill set that combined the intellectual with the physical in ways they hadn't fully appreciated. Mitchell moved to his rifle and began making adjustments to the scope. The optic was a sophisticated piece of equipment with multiple adjustment knobs for windage and elevation. Each click of these knobs moved the bullet's impact point by a precise amount at various distances. For this shot, he would need to make significant adjustments from the rifle's zero setting. "My rifle is zeroed at 300 meters, he explained while turning the elevation knob. "That means if I aimed directly at a target 300 meters away, the bullet would hit exactly where I aimed. But at 2,950 meters, gravity will have pulled the bullet down significantly. I need to aim well above the target to compensate." The mathematics involved were complex. The bullet would follow a curved path, rising initially due to the upward angle of the barrel, then falling as gravity overcame its forward momentum. At the target distance, the bullet would be traveling much slower than when it left the rifle, making it more susceptible to wind drift. "How much higher do you aim?" asked Sergeant Mills, one of the more experienced Royal Guard members. Mitchell consulted his ballistic computer. "For this shot, I need to hold approximately 45 meters above the target. That's about 15 stories. High on a building. If you were standing next to the target, you would see me aiming at what looks like empty sky." The concept amazed the observers. To hit something nearly 3 kilometers away, Mitchell had to aim at a point they couldn't even see, trusting his calculations completely. There was no room for doubt or second-guessing. Either the mathematics was correct, or the shot would. Miss-wind drift calculations were equally complex. The crosswind would push the bullet sideways during its 4-second flight. At the target end, this could result in a miss of several meters if not properly accounted for. Mitchell's computer showed he needed to aim approximately 3 meters to the left of the target to compensate for wind drift. As Mitchell worked through his final calculations, the atmosphere among the observers grew more tense. They were beginning to realize the incredible complexity of what he was attempting. This wasn't just about having good equipment or steady hands. This was about mastering a skill that combined physics, mathematics, meteorology, and psychology under pressure. The target itself was barely visible through the spotting scopes that had been set up for the observers. Even with magnification, it appeared as a tiny speck in the distance. The idea that a single bullet could be guided accurately across such a distance seemed to challenge the laws of physics. Mitchell made his final adjustments to the rifle scope and settled into his shooting position. But he wasn't ready to fire yet. First, he needed to verify his wind readings one more time and ensure all his calculations were correct. At this range, there was no opportunity for a quick follow-up shot. He would get one chance to demonstrate SAS capabilities to the Royal Guard, and that shot needed to be perfect. The weight of expectation settled on Mitchell's shoulders like an old, familiar coat. Around him, nearly 40 military personnel had gathered to witness what many believed was impossible. Among them were seasoned officers who had seen combat, experienced marksmen who understood the challenges of precision shooting, and younger soldiers whose understanding of SAS capabilities was about to be either confirmed or shattered. Mitchell had been in pressure situations before, but this was different. In combat, the enemy didn't know he was there. Here, everyone was watching, waiting, judging. The difference between a successful mission and a public demonstration was the luxury of privacy when things went wrong. Today, there would be no hiding. A missed shot. "Sergeant Major," Colonel Harrison approached quietly. "No pressure, but half the senior staff from 3 different units are here now. Word seems to have spread about what you're attempting." Mitchell looked up from his rifle and smiled calmly. "Good. More witnesses when it works." His confidence wasn't arrogance. It was the result of thousands of hours of practice and dozens of successful long-range engagements in real combat situations. But he knew that past success didn't guarantee future results. The mental aspect of extreme long-range shooting was perhaps the most crucial element and certainly the hardest to teach. Mitchell had learned this lesson early in his career when he missed what should have been an easy shot because his mind was focused on everything except the fundamentals. Since then, he had developed a mental routine that helped him maintain focus regardless of external pressure. The hardest part of shooting, he explained to Lieutenant Parker, who had asked about mental preparation, isn't the technical stuff. Anyone can learn to read wind and calculate trajectories. The hard part is quieting your mind enough to execute perfectly when it matters most. Mitchell began his mental preparation routine. First, he visualized the entire shot sequence from start to finish. He imagined settling into his shooting position, controlling his breathing, aligning the crosshairs, and following through after the trigger break. Mental rehearsal was a technique used by elite athletes and special forces operators alike. The mind couldn't distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one, so perfect mental rehearsal helped create muscle memory. Next, he addressed the doubt that always crept in before challenging shots. Doubt was natural and even, useful in small amounts. It kept you careful and thorough. But too much doubt could paralyze decision-making and cause muscle tension that would affect accuracy. Mitchell acknowledged the voice in his head that whispered about wind changes and calculation errors, then consciously chose to trust his training and preparation. The Royal Guard members watched as Mitchell's demeanor subtly changed. The friendly instructor who had been explaining techniques became someone else entirely. His movements became more deliberate, his speech more measured, and his focus more intense. They were witnessing the transformation of a skilled soldier into a precision instrument. "Breathing control is critical," Mitchell explained, though his voice now had a different quality to it. "At extreme ranges, even the rise and fall of your chest from breathing can move your point of aim enough to cause a miss. I need to fire during the natural pause between breaths when my body is completely still." He demonstrated the technique, taking a deep breath, letting half of it out, then holding. This is called the natural respiratory pause. For about 3 to 5 seconds, your body is relaxed and still. That's my window for taking the shot. Captain Davies noticed something else about Mitchell's preparation. "You seem completely different now, Sergeant Major. More focused, almost meditative." Mitchell nodded. "In SAS training, we call it switching on. It's a mental state where distractions fade away and you become completely absorbed in the task. Some people call it flow state or being in the zone. Whatever you call it, it's essential for performing under extreme pressure." The concept fascinated the Royal Guard officers. They were trained soldiers who understood pressure and performance, but they were seeing something beyond their usual experience. This wasn't just about being calm under fire. This was about achieving a level of mental control that allowed superhuman precision. Mitchell's ritual included checking and rechecking his equipment one final time, not because he didn't trust his earlier preparations, but because the act of methodical checking helped maintain his focused mental state. Each strap, each adjustment, each piece of equipment was verified and confirmed ready. The target seemed impossibly small and distant through his rifle scope. Even with maximum magnification, it appeared as a tiny black silhouette against the brown and green background of the Scottish countryside. Wind indicators along the range showed consistent but not perfectly steady conditions. Mitchell would need to time his shot for a moment when wind conditions matched his calculations as closely as possible. How do you deal with the fact that conditions might change between now and when the bullet arrives? Asked Sergeant Mills, who had been quietly observing Mitchell's preparation. That's where experience comes in, Mitchell replied, his eyes never leaving the scope. You learn to read the signs that tell you when conditions are about to shift. The way grass moves, how dust behaves, even the sounds around you. Right now, conditions are stable, but I can see some cloud movement that might affect wind patterns in the next few minutes. The pressure of time was added to all the other variables Mitchell had to manage. He couldn't wait indefinitely for perfect conditions, but he also couldn't rush the shot. Finding the right moment required balancing all these factors while maintaining the mental state necessary for precision shooting. Mitchell made one final check of his position. His body was aligned perfectly behind the rifle, with bone structure rather than muscle providing support for the weapon. His shooting position was stable enough that he could maintain it for several minutes without fatigue affecting his accuracy. The rifle rested on a bipod, but Mitchell's body provided the foundation for the entire shooting system. Last question before I take the shot, Colonel Harrison said quietly. In your honest assessment, what are the chances of hitting the target? Mitchell considered the question seriously. He had made similar shots in combat conditions, but never with quite so many variables and never with such an audience. Wind conditions were within acceptable parameters, his calculations had been double-checked, and his equipment was functioning perfectly. Most importantly, he felt confident and focused. Under these conditions, with this equipment, and given my preparation, Mitchell said after a long pause, I'd estimate about an 80% chance of a first-round hit. That might not sound high to you, but for a shot at this extreme range, those are excellent odds. The Royal Guard members were impressed by his honesty. A less experienced or more ego-driven shooter might have claimed certainty. Mitchell's realistic assessment of his chances actually increased their confidence in his abilities. He understood the limitations of his craft while still believing in his capability to succeed. The Highland morning had grown perfectly still. Even the birds seemed to sense the importance of the moment and had fallen silent. Mitchell settled into his final shooting position, feeling the familiar weight of the rifle against his shoulder. Every muscle in his body was relaxed, yet ready, like a coiled spring waiting for release. Through his scope, Mitchell could see the target clearly now. The black silhouette stood out against the brown hillside backdrop, though it still appeared impossibly small at nearly 3 kilometers distance. He had verified his range one final time, 2,250 meters exactly. The slight uphill angle to the target had been factored into his elevation calculations. "Spotter ready," called out Corporal Jenkins, Mitchell's longtime partner who had set up beside him with a high-powered spotting scope. Jenkins would watch the bullet's impact and call corrections if a second shot became necessary, though everyone hoped it wouldn't come to that. The Royal Guard members had formed a semicircle behind Mitchell, maintaining respectful distance while ensuring they had a clear view of the proceedings. Several had their own binoculars trained on the distant target, though none expected to actually see the bullet impact at such extreme range. The human eye simply couldn't track an object moving at nearly 800 meters per second across that distance. "General," Peters had arrived just minutes earlier, having driven up from the main base after hearing about the demonstration. His presence added another layer of pressure, but Mitchell had learned long ago to use pressure as a focusing tool rather than allowing it to create anxiety. "Wind check," Mitchell called softly to Jenkins. Jenkins studied the grass and vegetation, at various points along the range through his spotting scope. "Steady at 7 to 9 kilometers per hour from the southwest. Consistent across the range. Conditions are as good as they're going to get." Mitchell took 3 deep breaths, allowing his heart rate to settle. His pulse needed to be calm and steady. Even the slight movement from his heartbeat could affect accuracy at extreme range. Through years of training and combat experience, he had learned to control his body's responses under stress. The crosshairs in his scope were perfectly aligned on a point approximately 45 meters above the target and 3 meters to the left, exactly as his calculations had indicated. To anyone watching, it would appear that he was aiming at empty sky, but Mitchell trusted the mathematics and physics that guided his aim point. "Safety off," Mitchell announced, flicking the rifle's safety switch. The mechanical click seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness of the morning. Around him, the observers held their breath without realizing it. Even experienced military personnel rarely witnessed shooting at such extreme distances. Mitchell began his final breathing cycle. Deep breath in, half breath out, hold. His body reached the natural respiratory pause where all movement ceased. The crosshairs steadied on his calculated aim point. His finger took up the slack in the trigger until he felt the resistance that indicated it was ready to break. For a moment that lasted forever, Mitchell experienced the perfect clarity that came with complete focus. Wind conditions, range calculations, equipment settings, and body position all aligned in his mind. He felt connected to the rifle, the bullet, and even the distant target in a way that was impossible to explain to those who had never experienced it. The trigger broke with a crisp snap. The rifle bucked against Mitchell's shoulder with tremendous force, but his shooting position absorbed the recoil without disturbing his view through the scope. The suppressor reduced the sound to a sharp crack rather than the thunderous boom of an unsuppressed rifle, but the sound still echoed across the Highland Valley. Mitchell maintained his position behind the rifle, following through by keeping the crosshairs on his aim point for several seconds after firing. This follow-through was crucial for accuracy, ensuring that no unconscious movement during trigger pull affected the bullet's path. "Bullet away," Jenkins called out, though this was somewhat redundant. Everyone had heard the shot and seen the muzzle flash. Now came the waiting. At 2,950 meters, the bullet would take approximately 4 seconds to reach the target, traveling at an initial velocity of nearly 800 meters per second, but slowing due to air resistance. The observers found themselves counting silently. 1 second, 2 seconds. The bullet was halfway to the target now, passing through the wind zone that Mitchell had calculated would push it slightly off course. 3 seconds. The bullet was slowing, but still traveling faster than most people could imagine, crossing the final kilometer to the target. 4 seconds felt like an eternity. "Hit!" Jenkins shouted suddenly, his voice cracking with excitement. "Clean hit on the target!" The observers erupted in amazement. Several Royal Guard members raised their binoculars, trying to see evidence of the impact at the extreme distance. Through the spotting scopes, they could just make out that something had changed about the target's appearance, though details were impossible to discern. Mitchell finally lifted his head from the rifle scope, a slight smile creasing his weathered features. He had felt confident about the shot, but at such extreme range there was always an element of uncertainty until the spotter confirmed impact. "Outstanding shot, Sergeant Major!" Colonel Harrison exclaimed, clearly impressed. "I have to admit, I wasn't entirely sure it was possible. The stories we'd heard seemed almost too incredible to believe." General Peters approached Mitchell with obvious respect. "In 30 years of military service, I've never seen anything like that. The precision required for such a shot is simply extraordinary." Captain Davies was shaking his head in amazement. The calculations, the preparation, the mental control required, it's like watching a master craftsman at work. This completely changes my understanding of what's possible in long-range shooting. Mitchell began the process of making his rifle safe, engaging the safety, and removing the magazine. The demonstration was complete, but the impact of what the observers had witnessed was just beginning to sink in. They had seen something that challenged their understanding of the limits of human precision and military capability. Jenkins was still studying the target through his spotting scope. "Perfect center hit," he reported. "The bullet impacted exactly where it was supposed to, right in the center mass of the silhouette. At that range, with those conditions, it was a textbook perfect shot." Lieutenant Parker approached Mitchell with obvious respect. "Sir, I have to ask, how often do SAS snipers make shots at this kind of range in actual combat situations?" Mitchell considered the question carefully. "Not often at quite this extreme distance," he answered honestly. "But the principles are the same whether you're shooting 800 meters or 2,950 meters. The difference is just in the complexity of the calculations and the margin for error. In combat, we typically engage at ranges where we're confident of first-round hits, but sometimes tactical situations require extreme-range shots." The success of the demonstration had achieved exactly what General Peters had hoped for. The Royal Guard members now understood that the stories they had heard about SAS sniper capabilities weren't exaggerations or folklore. They were real, achievable results that came from combining scientific knowledge with intensive training and mental discipline. As word of the successful shot spread among the observers, Mitchell began packing his equipment with the same methodical care he had used in preparing for the shot. The demonstration was over, but the impression it had made would last much longer. Word of Mitchell's incredible shot spread through the military base faster than anyone could have anticipated. Within an hour, officers from different units were arriving to hear first-hand accounts from the witnesses. The Royal Guard members, who had been skeptical that morning, were now enthusiastic advocates for SAS capabilities, sharing detailed descriptions of the precision and professionalism they had observed. Colonel Harrison gathered his men for an immediate debrief while the experience was still fresh in their minds. "Gentlemen," he began, "what we witnessed today wasn't just exceptional marksmanship. It was a demonstration of how science, training, and mental discipline can push human performance beyond what most people believe possible." Captain Davies was still processing what he had seen. "The level of preparation was extraordinary, sir. Every detail was calculated and verified. The sergeant major wasn't just taking a shot. He was solving a complex physics problem in real time." Lieutenant Parker nodded in agreement. "What impressed me most was his honesty about the odds. He didn't claim it was certain, but he understood exactly what was required to succeed. That kind of realistic confidence only comes from real expertise." Meanwhile, Mitchell was surrounded by officers from other units who had heard about the demonstration. Each wanted to understand how such precision was achieved at extreme range. Mitchell patiently explained the principles behind long-range shooting, emphasizing that it wasn't about natural talent or expensive equipment, but about understanding and applying scientific principles. "The most important thing to understand," Mitchell told a group of infantry officers, "is that extreme-range shooting is a skill that can be taught and learned. It requires dedication and practice, but the fundamentals are available to anyone willing to put in the effort to master them." Major E. Williams, the base commander, had requested a formal report on the demonstration for distribution to other training facilities. The successful shot at 2,950 meters would become a case study in precision shooting techniques and the capabilities of properly trained snipers. Jenkins, Mitchell's spotter, was receiving his own share of attention. Many of the observers hadn't fully understood his role until seeing how the Snotter shooter team worked together. "People think sniping is a solo activity," Jenkins explained, "but it's really a team effort. The spotter handles wind reading, target identification, and range estimation, while the shooter focuses on weapon handling and trigger control. The target itself had become an object of fascination. A team was dispatched to retrieve it and examine the bullet impact up close. When they returned, the evidence was undeniable. The bullet had struck dead center in the silhouette, creating a clean hole that testified to the accuracy of Mitchell's shot. Dr. Sarah Chen, a ballistics expert from the military research facility, arrived in the afternoon to interview Mitchell about his techniques. She was particularly interested in his method for calculating wind drift at various distances along the bullet's path. "Your approach to reading environmental conditions is more sophisticated than many of our computer models," she told him. The demonstration had implications beyond just showcasing SAS capabilities. Military training programs would need to be updated to reflect what was actually possible with proper instruction. Range facilities would need to accommodate longer distances for advanced sniper training. Equipment procurement would need to consider the requirements for extreme range shooting. General Peters convened a meeting with senior officers from all participating units to discuss the lessons learned from the demonstration. "Today's events have shown us that we may have been underestimating the potential of our sniper training programs," he began. "If one soldier can achieve this level of precision, we need to examine how we can incorporate these techniques into broader training curricula." Colonel Harrison presented his unit's perspective. "My men came away with tremendous respect for SAS capabilities, but more importantly, they now understand that exceptional performance comes from exceptional preparation. The scientific approach they witnessed today has applications beyond just marksmanship." The Royal Guard members had indeed been transformed by the experience. Their questions during the afternoon session showed a deeper understanding of the complexity involved in precision shooting. They asked about training progressions, equipment requirements, and how such skills could be adapted to their own roles in protecting the royal family. Mitchell found himself in the unexpected position of informal instructor for the remainder of the day. Officers who had heard about the demonstration sought him out for advice on improving their own marksmanship programs. He emphasized repeatedly that the shot at 2,950 meters was the result of years of progressive training, not something that could be achieved quickly. "We start new snipers at much shorter ranges," he explained to a group of training officers. "Basic fundamentals at 300 meters, then gradually extending range as their skills develop. Nobody starts with shots like today's demonstration. That would be setting them up for failure." The psychological impact of the demonstration was perhaps as important as the technical achievement. Military personnel who had heard stories about SAS capabilities now had concrete evidence of what was possible. This would affect their confidence in joint operations and their understanding of what support the SAS could provide in various scenarios. Jenkins made an important point during one of the discussions. Today's conditions were ideal for extreme range shooting. Light winds, good visibility, stable weather. In combat, you rarely get perfect conditions. The real skill is knowing when such shots are possible and when they're not. As the day progressed, Mitchell began to appreciate the broader impact of what had started as a simple demonstration. The Royal Guard's questions about SAS capabilities had led to an educational experience that would influence training and operations across multiple military units. Dr. Chen's preliminary analysis of the shot showed remarkable precision. "Based on the impact point and our knowledge of the environmental conditions," she reported, "the bullet struck within approximately 10 centimeters of the calculated aim point. At that extreme range, such accuracy is truly exceptional." The success of the demonstration also raised questions about enemy capabilities. If British forces could achieve such precision, what could adversaries with similar training and equipment accomplish? This would need to be factored into tactical planning and defensive measures. By evening, Mitchell's successful shot had become the subject of formal reports, training discussions, and strategic planning sessions. What had begun as a response to curiosity about SAS capabilities had evolved into a comprehensive examination of long-range shooting techniques and their applications in modern military operations. The Royal Guard members departed that day with a completely different understanding of what they had initially questioned. Their skepticism had been replaced by respect and a desire to understand how similar principles might apply to their own specialized roles within the British military. Structure. 3 months after Mitchell's demonstration at the Scottish Highlands training ground, the ripple effects of that single shot continued to spread throughout the British military and beyond. What had started as a simple question about SAS capabilities had evolved into a comprehensive revolution in how long-range precision shooting was understood, taught, and applied across multiple military branches. The Royal Guard had implemented new training protocols based on the scientific principles they had witnessed. Captain Davies, who had been among the most skeptical observers, now led a specialized marksmanship program that emphasized the mathematical and environmental factors Mitchell had demonstrated. "We're not trying to recreate that extreme-range shot," Davies explained to his trainees, "but we're applying the same systematic approach to our operational requirements." Colonel Harrison reported significant improvements in his unit's overall shooting performance. "The lesson wasn't just about long-range shooting," he noted in his quarterly report. "It was about the level of preparation and attention to detail required for exceptional performance in any military skill." Mitchell himself had been promoted and assigned to develop a new training curriculum for military snipers across all branches of the British Armed Forces. His demonstration had proven that extreme-range capabilities were achievable with proper instruction, leading to increased funding and support for advanced marksmanship programs. The training facility where the demonstration took place had been expanded to include permanent long-range shooting positions at distances up to 3,000 meters. Officers from allied nations regularly visited to observe the training methods that had produced such remarkable results. The Mitchell method, as it had become informally known, was being studied and adapted by military forces around the world. Jenkins, Mitchell's spotter during the famous shot, had been assigned to lead the spotter training program. His role in the successful demonstration had highlighted the importance of the sniper-spotter team dynamic, leading to enhanced training for observation and wind-reading skills. Dr. Chen's research into the ballistics of extreme-range shooting had received significant funding following the demonstration. Her analysis of Mitchell's shot had led to improvements in ballistic calculation software and better understanding of environmental factors affecting long-range accuracy. That single shot provided more real-world data about extreme-range ballistics than years of computer modeling, she reported. The psychological impact of the demonstration had been equally significant. Military personnel who had witnessed the shot or heard detailed accounts of it approached their own training with increased confidence in what was achievable through proper preparation and scientific methodology. The idea that impossible shots were simply problems that hadn't been properly solved had taken root throughout the military training establishment. General Peters had used the demonstration as a case study in a presentation to NATO allies about the capabilities of modern military forces. The detailed documentation of Mitchell's preparation, execution, and results had become a template for evaluating and developing extreme performance capabilities in other military disciplines. International recognition of the achievement had led to invitations for Mitchell to demonstrate his techniques to allied forces. He had conducted similar demonstrations in Australia, Canada, and the United States, each time emphasizing that the capability was the result of systematic training rather than individual talent. The target from Mitchell's original shot had been preserved and displayed in the base's training facility, complete with documentation of the environmental conditions and calculations involved. It served as both inspiration and evidence that extreme precision was achievable through proper application of scientific principles. Young soldiers entering sniper training programs now began their instruction with an understanding that exceptional performance was possible. The stories of Mitchell's shot, backed by detailed documentation and witness accounts, provided motivation and established standards that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. The success had also led to improvements in equipment and technology. Manufacturers of rifles, optics, and ballistic computers had worked with military researchers to develop systems capable of supporting extreme-range shooting. The demonstration had proven there was both capability and demand for such precision. Equipment. Mitchell's approach to mental preparation had been incorporated into training programs beyond just marksmanship. The techniques he used for maintaining focus under pressure and managing complex calculations while performing physically demanding tasks had applications in many military specialties. 6 months after the demonstration, Lieutenant Parker, one of the Royal Guard officers who had witnessed the shot, achieved his own remarkable success. Using principles learned from watching Mitchell, he successfully engaged a target at 1,800 meters during a training exercise, a distance that would have seemed impossible to him before witnessing the Highland demonstration. The formal military report on Mitchell's shot had been classified and distributed to Allied intelligence services as an example of current capabilities in precision shooting. Enemy forces would need to account for such possibilities in their tactical planning, potentially affecting how they positioned personnel and equipment. Training facilities worldwide had begun implementing longer-range shooting courses based on the techniques demonstrated that day in Scotland. The science of extreme-range shooting, once considered a highly specialized skill limited to a few elite units, was becoming part of standard advanced military training. Mitchell often reflected on how a simple demonstration intended to satisfy curiosity had grown into something much larger. His shot at 2,950 meters had not only proven SAS capabilities to the Royal Guard, but had sparked a revolution in military marksmanship training that would influence soldiers for generations. The legacy of that perfect shot continued to grow. New records were being set by soldiers trained in Mitchell's methods. Technology was advancing to support even more extreme-range engagements. Most importantly, the military understanding of human potential had been permanently expanded. Years later, when military historians would write about advances in precision shooting, they would point to that morning in the Scottish Highlands as a turning point. One shot, perfectly calculated and flawlessly executed, had demonstrated that the limits of human capability were not fixed barriers, but challenges waiting for the right combination of science, training, and determination to overcome them. The Royal Guard members who had questioned SAS capabilities that morning left as believers not just in the SAS, but in the power of systematic preparation and scientific approach to military skills. Their transformation from skeptics to advocates ensured that the lessons of Mitchell's demonstration would continue to influence military training long after the details of the shot itself became military legend.